The endless hallway. Lila lived in a sprawling, nondescript apartment complex on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where neighbors barely knew each other, and the air carried a permanent scent of damp carpet and faint cooking spices. She had moved in 6 months ago, lured by the affordable rent and proximity to her new job. At first, everything seemed normal, even mundane. That changed one night when she decided to take the trash out after midnight. The hallway was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering inconsistently. Lila felt a twinge of unease as she walked, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. She passed door after door, each identical to the last, their brass numbers dulled with age. The trash chute was at the far end of the hall, just past the emergency exit. Or at least it was supposed to be. As she walked, the hallway seemed longer than usual. She glanced behind her, expecting to see the door to her apartment only a few steps away, but it had already receded into the distance. Her stomach twisted. She picked up her pace, her footsteps echoing louder now. The trash bag in her hand felt heavier with every step. When she reached what should have been the trash chute, she found only another stretch of hallway. The walls were closing in, or maybe it was her imagination. She turned back, but the hallway behind her looked just as endless as the one in front. Her breath hitched. "What the hell?" she muttered, gripping the trash bag tighter. She decided to keep moving forward, convinced she had simply missed the chute in the dim light. The overhead bulbs buzzed faintly, casting sporadic shadows on the walls. The hallway stretched on, identical doors lining each side. She began to jog, then run, the bag swinging wildly by her side. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Finally, she skidded to a stop, her chest heaving. She dropped the trash bag and leaned against the wall, staring down the corridor. It was the same, no matter how far she went. Endless. Panic crept into her chest. She turned to one of the doors and knocked. No answer. She knocked harder, her knuckles stinging. Still nothing. She tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Each door she tried was locked tight. Her breaths grew shallow as her fingers trembled. "Help!" she shouted, her voice reverberating down the empty corridor. "Is anyone there?" No response. She pulled out her phone, her hands slick with sweat. The screen illuminated, showing full bars of service, but no matter how many times she dialed, the call wouldn't connect. Not to her friends, not to the police, not to anyone. The clock on her phone seemed frozen, the numbers refusing to change. Suddenly she heard it. A soft shuffling sound behind her. She whipped around, her heart hammering in her chest. At first she saw nothing. Then, at the very edge of her vision, something moved. A shadow. It was tall and narrow, almost humanoid, but not quite. It lingered at the far end of the hall, just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. Lila froze. The shadow didn't move closer, but it didn't retreat either. It just stood there, watching. Or at least, she thought it was watching. She couldn't see eyes or a face, just a dark silhouette. Her mouth went dry as dread coiled in her stomach. She backed away slowly, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. The shadow remained still, but the air around her felt heavier, as if the hallway itself were pressing down on her. She turned and ran. Her legs burned as she sprinted down the corridor, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The doors blurred past her, each identical to the last. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, had to escape this endless nightmare. After what felt like hours, she stumbled to a halt, her legs giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. Her phone was dead now, the battery drained inexplicably fast. She was utterly alone. Or so she thought. A faint whisper broke the silence, so soft she almost didn't hear it. It came from behind one of the doors. Lila's head snapped up, her ears straining. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't a language she recognized, but it carried an undeniable urgency. She crawled to the nearest door and pressed her ear against it. The whisper stopped. Her blood turned to ice. Slowly she turned her head to look down the hallway. The shadow was there again, closer this time. Much closer. She could make out its twisted shape now, its limbs unnaturally long and angular. It didn't walk. It glided, its movement unnervingly smooth. Lila scrambled to her feet, adrenaline surging through her veins. She tried another door, pounding on it with all her strength. "Please, somebody help me," she screamed. The whisper returned, louder this time, but it didn't come from the door. It came from the walls.